There is a quiet rhythm to the passing of crowns, a rhythm older than castles, older than the sound of bells that echo through English valleys. It is the rhythm of power, rising, falling, and rising again, like the tides along the cold shores of Britain. Before the crown ever gleamed in gold, before kings called themselves English, this island was wild and unbound. Tribes roamed its forests and marshes, speaking tongues that have long since vanished. Their rulers were warlords and chieftains, men and women who led by courage and cunning rather than divine right. To them the land was alive, every hill a spirit, every river a god. Then came the Romans, marching in their shining armor, carrying the eagle standards of empire. They built roads, walls, and towns. They brought order and iron and the strange promise of civilization. For nearly 4 centuries, Britannia was theirs, a distant province at the edge of the known world. But when the empire began to crumble, its legions withdrew, leaving behind the echo of discipline and the bones of stone walls.
In the centuries that followed, new peoples came. The Anglo-Saxons from the east, fierce and pagan, carving the land into realms with names that still survive: Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, Kent. They brought their gods, their songs, and their hunger for land. But slowly, their many tongues blended, their tribes united, and Christianity took root once more. In the long twilight of the early Middle Ages, England began to take shape. Among these Saxon kings rose one whose memory would never fade: Alfred of Wessex, known forever as Alfred the Great. He was both warrior and scholar, a man who believed that learning could strengthen a nation as surely as the sword. When Viking raiders came like storm clouds from the north, Alfred built fortresses, trained armies, and struck back. He fought not just for survival, but for unity. He dreamed of one England, bound by law and faith. When he died in 899, that dream still flickered uncertainly, but his descendants would carry it forward. In the generations that followed, the kingdom he imagined began to form. Kings like Athelstan, Edgar, and Edmund slowly knit the realm together, binding Saxon, Dane, and Britain under one crown. By the 11th century, England was powerful, wealthy, and admired. But its peace would not last. For across the sea in Normandy, a new power was watching. Its Duke, William, claimed that the English king, Edward the Confessor, had promised him the throne. When Edward died childless in 1066 and Harold Godwinson seized the crown, William prepared for war. He gathered ships, knights, and the blessing of the church, and crossed the Channel with fire in his heart.
At Hastings, beneath a sky heavy with omen, the fate of England turned. Harold fell with an arrow through his eye, and William, forever after called the Conqueror, claimed the throne. The Saxon age was over. The Norman age had begun. William ruled with an iron will. He built stone castles across the land, fortresses that rose like thunder from the earth. He ordered a great survey of his new kingdom, the Domesday Book, recording every village, every field, every soul. Nothing like it had ever been done before. England became one of the best governed lands in Europe, its king a man both feared and admired. Yet conquest breeds resentment. William's grip was strong, but not unchallenged. He crushed rebellions, punished traitors, and filled the land with Norman lords who spoke French, not English.
Two peoples lived side by side, the conquerors and the conquered, their languages and customs slowly mingling. In time, their children would become something new, neither wholly Norman nor Saxon, but English. When William died in 1087, his body, so great in life, burst from its coffin during burial, a grim symbol of how hard it was to contain such a man. His sons inherited not his unity, but his quarrels. William Rufus took England, his brother Robert took Normandy, and another brother, Henry, waited like a shadow. Henry seized the throne after William Rufus died mysteriously while hunting, a stray arrow in the forest, a death that has never stopped whispering. Henry I ruled with sharp intelligence. He strengthened the government and married a Saxon princess, seeking to heal the wound between conqueror and conquered. But tragedy followed him. His only legitimate son drowned when the white ship sank off the coast of Normandy. Henry never smiled again. With no male heir, he named his daughter Matilda as successor, a bold and dangerous choice in a world that distrusted queens.
When Henry died, his nephew Stephen seized the throne, and England descended into chaos. Barons built private armies, castles became nests of rebellion, and the land was torn apart by civil war. Chroniclers wrote that during those years, Christ and his saints slept. It was a time of misery, famine, and fear. At last, peace came not through victory, but exhaustion. Stephen agreed that Matilda's son, Henry of Anjou, would inherit after him. And so, when Stephen died in 1154, the boy became Henry II, the first of the Plantagenets, a dynasty that would rule England for more than 3 centuries. Henry II was tireless, intelligent, and temperamental, a man of action and fury. He rode from one end of his vast empire to the other, ruling not just England, but lands in France that stretched from Normandy to Aquitaine. He reformed the courts, strengthened royal justice, and established the principles of common law that still echo in modern times. But his reign was also scarred by rage, especially against one man, Thomas Becket, his former friend turned Archbishop of Canterbury. Becket defied the king's interference in church matters. Their quarrel grew bitter, until, in a moment of fury, Henry cried out, "Will no one rid me of this troublesome priest?" 4 knights took his words as command. They rode to Canterbury and struck Becket down before the altar. All England shuddered. Henry was forced to do public penance, walking barefoot through the cathedral, the most powerful man in Europe, humbled by guilt. His family brought him no peace either. His wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, a queen of dazzling charm and will, turned against him. His sons rebelled, each hungering for their share of power. One of them, Richard, would become a legend, known to history as Richard the Lionheart.
Richard was everything a medieval king was meant to be: bold, beautiful, and restless. He spent only a few months of his 10-year reign in England, preferring the battlefields of the Crusades. He fought with brilliance and courage, but his wars drained the kingdom's coffers. On his way home, he was captured and held for ransom, a king held hostage like a common thief. The people of England paid dearly to buy his freedom. When he finally returned, he ruled briefly before dying from a wound received in battle. His brother John then took the throne, and with him came one of the darkest chapters in royal history. John was suspicious, greedy, and cruel.
He quarreled with his barons, lost lands in France, and defied the Pope until England was placed under interdict, its churches silent, its people unshriven. When his lords could bear no more, they rose against him, forcing him to sign a document that would change the world, the Magna Carta. It declared that even the king was not above the law. John sealed it in 1215, and though he soon broke its promises, the idea endured. John died amid rebellion, his kingdom torn once more. But his young son Henry III survived. He was gentle, artistic, and devout, more monk than monarch. He rebuilt Westminster Abbey in shining stone, filling it with light. But his long reign was troubled by discontent. The barons, led by Simon de Montfort, demanded reform. When Henry refused, civil war erupted again. For a brief moment, de Montfort ruled England, even summoning what some called the first true parliament. But he was killed in battle, and Henry's son Edward restored royal authority.
Edward would become one of the greatest kings of the Middle Ages. Edward I, the hammer of the Scots. Tall and fierce, he believed utterly in kingship and conquest. He subdued Wales, building castles so mighty they still guard the hills. Then he turned his eyes northward to Scotland. There he met defiance in the figure of William Wallace, a man who fought for freedom with unmatched courage. Wallace was captured and executed, but his name became immortal, the spirit of rebellion that even kings could not kill. Edward died while marching north again, his body failing but his will unbroken. His son, Edward II, could not fill his father's shadow. He loved music and friendship more than war, and his closeness to his favorite, Piers Gaveston, scandalized the nobles. Rebellion rose, Gaveston was executed, and the king's wife, Isabella of France, betrayed him. She and her lover, Roger Mortimer, overthrew him, forcing him to abdicate in favor of his son. Edward II met his end in secret, murdered in a manner so cruel that whispers of it still darken the annals of history. And so the crown passed to a boy of 14, Edward III, who would restore its glory once more. Under his reign, chivalry flowered. The age of the knight reached its height. He claimed the throne of France and began a war that would last 100 years. English longbows shattered the might of French cavalry at Crécy and Poitiers. His son, the Black Prince, became a legend, and for a time it seemed England might rule both sides of the Channel. But time is a patient thief. Plague swept the land, the Black Death, silent and merciless. It killed lord and peasant alike, leaving villages empty and fields untended. The survivors found themselves changed, their faith shaken, their world forever altered. Edward grew old, his brilliance fading into melancholy. When he died, he left behind a realm strong yet weary, a people proud yet restless, and a monarchy poised for both greatness and ruin.
The old king was gone, and with him faded the golden light of medieval chivalry. Edward III's crown passed to his 10-year-old grandson, a boy named Richard. He would grow into a man both brilliant and doomed, forever remembered as Richard II. At first, he seemed born for greatness. He was handsome, cultured, and spoke with a poet's grace. But the kingdom he inherited was weary, exhausted by plague, war, and hunger. When peasants rose in rebellion, led by a man called Wat Tyler, young Richard rode out to meet them.
With astonishing courage, he faced the angry crowd and promised reform. But once the rebellion ended, his promises vanished like mist. Richard became proud, suspicious, and cruel. He surrounded himself with flatterers and punished those who questioned him. Among his rivals was his cousin, Henry of Bolingbroke. When Richard exiled him and seized his lands, Henry struck back. He returned with an army, the people rallied to his cause, and Richard was taken prisoner. In a lonely castle, the fallen king was left to die, a victim of starvation or murder. No one truly knows. And thus, Henry Bolingbroke became Henry IV, the first of the Lancastrian kings. But Henry's crown was heavy with guilt. He had taken it by force, and rebellion haunted his reign. He was often ill, his conscience troubled. His son, the fiery Prince Hal, drank and brawled and laughed with commoners, a prince who seemed unfit to rule. Yet when Henry IV died, the boy became Henry V, and everything changed. Henry V was the very image of the warrior king. He renewed England's claim to the French throne and led his men across the Channel. At Agincourt, outnumbered and surrounded, he delivered one of the most famous victories in history. Arrows fell like rain, and the flower of French chivalry was cut down in the mud. His words, his courage, his faith in destiny all made him a legend. He married a French princess, and for a moment it seemed the two realms might unite at last. But destiny is fickle. Henry died young, and his infant son inherited both crowns.
That child, Henry VI, was gentle and pious, but unfit for power. His mind was fragile, his will weak. Under him, England lost almost all its French possessions. At home, rival nobles began to plot, whispering of the old claim of the House of York. The country split in two, red rose against white, Lancaster against York, and the Wars of the Roses began. For 30 years England bled. Battles raged from north to south, St. Albans, Towton, Barnet, Bosworth. Kings rose and fell like tides. Henry VI was deposed, restored, and deposed again. Edward IV, handsome and strong, seized the throne for York. For a time peace returned, but his sudden death left the crown to his young son, a boy named Edward V. The boy never wore the crown. His uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, took him and his brother into the Tower of London, and soon they vanished. 2 boys, gone forever, their fate whispered in darkness. Richard crowned himself king, Richard III. He ruled for only 2 years before the final reckoning came. In 1485, at Bosworth Field, a challenger arrived, Henry Tudor, a distant descendant of the Lancastrian line. The battle was fierce, the outcome uncertain, until Richard, crying, "A horse! A horse! My kingdom for a horse!" was struck down. His crown, literally found in the mud, was placed upon Henry's head. And so ended the Plantagenets, and so began the Tudors. Henry VII, the first Tudor, brought order to chaos. He was cautious, shrewd, and patient, a king who trusted numbers more than swords. He married Elizabeth of York, uniting the red rose and the white. Under him, England's wounds began to heal. But peace is rarely inherited.
When Henry VII died, his son ascended, young, confident, and full of fire. His name was Henry VIII. He would be remembered not just as a king, but as a force of nature. He was larger than life, charming, athletic, intelligent, and terrifying. He loved, he fought, he built, he destroyed. He married 6 times, and in pursuit of a son, he tore his kingdom away from Rome itself. When the Pope refused to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Henry broke from the Catholic Church. He declared himself the head of the Church of England. Monasteries were dissolved, their treasures seized, their monks cast into the cold. England's faith fractured, never to be whole again. And yet, Henry's power only grew. He built great ships, palaces, and the very image of monarchy itself. But behind the grandeur lay fear. Wives died or were executed. Friends turned into enemies. The once golden prince became a bloated tyrant, feared even in his own court. When Henry died in 1547, the kingdom passed to his only son, Edward VI, a frail boy of 9, brilliant but sickly. Under his short reign, Protestant reform deepened. But Edward died young, leaving behind a dangerous question: who next? His cousin, Lady Jane Grey, was named queen, a gentle scholarly girl who never wanted the crown. She ruled for 9 days before being overthrown by Henry's eldest daughter, Mary I. Mary was a devout Catholic, determined to undo her father's heresy. She restored papal authority and burned Protestants at the stake. To her enemies, she became Bloody Mary. Her reign was short, her heart broken, and she died without children.
Then came her half-sister, Elizabeth. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, the last Tudor and one of England's greatest monarchs. She inherited a divided, fragile kingdom and ruled it with brilliance. Her court glittered with poets, explorers, and spies. Francis Drake circled the world. Shakespeare gave voice to English dreams, and the arts flourished as never before. But danger surrounded her. Plots and assassins lurked in shadows. Her cousin, Mary Queen of Scots, became both rival and victim. Elizabeth reluctantly signed her death warrant. When the Spanish Armada came in 1588, the Queen rode among her troops in shining armor, declaring she had the heart and stomach of a king. The storm and English courage destroyed the invincible fleet. England stood proud and unbroken. When Elizabeth died in 1603, she left no heir. With her ended the Tudor bloodline. But far to the north, in the cold lands of Scotland, a new king waited, James VI of Scotland, the son of the executed Mary, Queen of Scots. He became James I of England, uniting the two crowns under one monarch. James was a scholar more than a warrior. He loved books, learning, and the idea of divine right, that kings ruled by God's will alone. Under his reign, the King James Bible was written, one of the most beautiful works in the English tongue. But danger surrounded her. Plots and assassins lurked in shadows. Her cousin, Mary Queen of Scots, became both rival and victim. Elizabeth reluctantly signed her death warrant. When the Spanish Armada came in 1588, the Queen rode among her troops in shining armor, declaring she had the heart and stomach of a king. The storm and English courage destroyed the invincible fleet. England stood proud and unbroken. When Elizabeth died in 1603,
She left no heir. With her ended the Tudor bloodline. But far to the north, in the cold lands of Scotland, a new king waited. James VI of Scotland, the son of the executed Mary, Queen of Scots. He became James I of England, uniting the two crowns under one monarch. James was a scholar more than a warrior. He loved books, learning, and the idea of divine right, that kings ruled by God's will alone. Under his reign, the King James Bible was written, one of the most beautiful works in the English tongue. But his belief in absolute power would sow seeds of conflict that his son could not avoid. Charles I inherited his father's pride, but not his wisdom. He quarrelled with Parliament, taxed without consent, and married a Catholic queen, alarming his Protestant subjects. Year by year, mistrust grew, until the realm divided again. King against Parliament, crown against people. The English Civil War had begun.
For nearly a decade, the island burned. Cavalier and Roundhead clashed across moors and fields. Charles was captured, escaped, and captured again. In 1649, after a public trial, he was condemned to death, the first English king ever executed by his own people. As the axe fell, silence fell with it. The monarchy was dead. In its place rose a new ruler, not a king, but a soldier. Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector, ruled the Commonwealth of England. He was stern, devout, and unyielding. His rule brought order, but not joy. Theaters closed, revelry was banned, and the nation seemed to hold its breath. When Cromwell died, his system could not stand. The people longed for the crown again, for the pageantry and comfort of monarchy. And so, in 1660, the exiled son of Charles I returned. The monarchy was restored. Charles II rode into London amid cheers and flowers, his long hair flowing, his smile triumphant. He was witty, worldly, and determined to enjoy life. The court sparkled with laughter and scandal. But behind the merriment, the kingdom still trembled. Plague and fire ravaged London, and religious division simmered once more. Charles died without legitimate heirs, and the crown passed to his brother, James II, a Catholic king in a Protestant land. He ruled poorly, his arrogance alienating allies. When his Protestant daughter, Mary, and her husband, William of Orange, invaded from Holland, James fled. The throne passed to William and Mary jointly in 1689. It was called the Glorious Revolution, a bloodless transfer of power that forever changed the monarchy. For the first time, the crown ruled not by divine right, but by Parliament's will. The Bill of Rights limited royal power, establishing the constitutional monarchy that endures to this day. With the Glorious Revolution, the British crown was forever changed. Gone were the days when kings ruled by the sword and divine decree. Now they reigned by consent, their power shaped not by the might of armies, but by the will of Parliament and the people. William and Mary ruled together, but it was not a reign of comfort. They were more Dutch than English, cautious and practical. Mary died young, leaving William to rule alone, a lonely man in a foreign land. He brought stability, trade, and new alliances, but never love from his subjects. When he died in 1702, there were no children to follow him.
The crown passed to Mary's sister, Anne. Queen Anne was shy, gentle, and devout. She suffered terribly in her personal life, 17 pregnancies, yet no child survived to adulthood. Her grief was deep, her heart fragile, but she ruled with quiet dignity. During her reign, England and Scotland were formally united in 1707, creating the Kingdom of Great Britain. For the first time, one crown truly ruled one island.
Anne's reign also saw the rise of great leaders like the Duke of Marlborough, whose victories on the continent brought glory to Britain. But the Queen's health failed, and with her last breath ended the Stuart line. The search for a Protestant heir led across the sea to Hanover in Germany, and so began a new dynasty, the House of Hanover. George I arrived in 1714, speaking little English and caring more for his German estates than for his new kingdom. The people found him strange, aloof, and foreign. But his reign marked the birth of a new balance of power. The monarch withdrew from daily government, leaving ministers to lead. Out of this grew the position of the Prime Minister, first embodied by the cunning Robert Walpole. Britain was becoming something new, a constitutional monarchy guided by politics rather than royal command. George II succeeded his father, proud, temperamental, and fond of the battlefield. He was the last British king to lead his troops in person at the Battle of Dettingen. His reign saw the growth of trade, colonies, and culture. London expanded, music flourished, and the empire began to stretch its fingers across the world. But the Queen's quarrels with her son, Frederick, were bitter and public. When Frederick died before him, the crown would pass to his grandson, a young man who would define an era. George III. He came to the throne in 1760, at just 22 years old, declaring proudly, "Born and educated in this country, I glory in the name of Britain." He loved his people, his family, and his duty. He was a man of sincerity and faith. But history would not be kind to him.
At first, his reign shone with promise. Britain triumphed in the 7 Years' War, gaining vast lands in North America and India. The empire was growing into something enormous, powerful, and rich. But across the Atlantic, discontent brewed. Colonists protested taxes and the distant rule of Parliament. "Taxation without representation," they cried. When rebellion came, George refused to yield. The American War of Independence tore away the colonies and broke his heart. When the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, Britain lost its first empire, but not its spirit. As years passed, new challenges rose: wars with revolutionary France, the rise of Napoleon, and the dawn of the Industrial Age. George, once so steadfast, began to suffer from bouts of madness. The brilliant, steady hand of the monarch faltered. His son, the Prince of Wales, ruled as regent, and when George III finally died in 1820, the people mourned the old king who had loved them, even through his afflictions. The regent became George IV, flamboyant, extravagant, and selfish. He built grand palaces, surrounded himself with beauty and excess, but left his country disillusioned. His brother, William IV, followed, a sailor king, bluff and plain-spoken. He reigned briefly, overseeing great reform, the abolition of slavery and the expansion of voting rights. But like so many before him, he left no legitimate heir. The throne passed instead to a young woman who would change everything.
Her name was Victoria.
When she became queen in 1837, she was just 18, small, serious, and untested. No one could have guessed that she would rule for more than 60 years, longer than any monarch before her. Her reign would give a name to an entire era, the Victorian Age. Under her, Britain became the most powerful empire the world had ever known. Steam engines roared, factories rose, railways spanned the land. From India to Africa, from Canada to Australia, the sun never set on Victoria's dominion. Yet she was not a warrior or a conqueror. She was a mother, a widow, and a symbol of steadfast morality. Her marriage to Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha was one of true love. Together they embodied duty, family, and progress. But when Albert died young, Victoria's grief was boundless. She wore black for the rest of her life, retreating into shadow, a lonely figure presiding over a nation bursting with energy. Despite her mourning, the empire thrived. Science, invention, and exploration flourished. Great names like Charles Darwin, Florence Nightingale, and Charles Dickens shaped the century. The monarchy itself evolved into something symbolic, less a ruler, more a guardian of unity. By the time of Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in 1897, the streets of London overflowed with pride. The old queen, frail but smiling, had become the grandmother of Europe. When she died in 1901, an age ended with her. The Victorian world, confident, industrial, and imperial, gave way to something uncertain. Her son, Edward VII, brought warmth and ease to the throne, opening a new century with charm and diplomacy. His reign was short but glittering, a brief Edwardian summer before the storm.
That storm came in 1914, the Great War, the war to end all wars. Edward's son, George V, faced a world in chaos. Millions died in the trenches and empires crumbled. In Russia, his cousin the Tsar was overthrown and murdered. To distance his own family from German ties, George changed the royal house's name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to something proudly British, the House of Windsor. The war left scars that never healed. Britain's empire survived, but faith in monarchy wavered. When peace came, the king was seen not as a ruler of conquests, but as a symbol of endurance. Through the 1920s and 1930s, the monarchy became quieter, more domestic, part of the people's lives. But trouble stirred again when George's eldest son, Edward VIII, fell in love with an American divorcee, Wallis Simpson. His love defied the church and the government. Faced with the choice between crown and heart, Edward chose love. In 1936, he abdicated, the first English monarch to voluntarily give up the throne. His words, broadcast to the world, trembled with emotion. I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility without the help and support of the woman I love. The crown passed to his younger brother, George VI, shy, dutiful, and unprepared. He stammered when he spoke. Yet, under his reign, the monarchy would find its courage once more. When war returned in 1939, Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany. The king and his wife, Queen Elizabeth, refused to flee even as bombs fell over London. Their calm, their dignity, and their presence gave hope to millions.
In those dark years, the monarchy was not distant, it was human, suffering beside its people. When victory came in 1945, the crowds filled the streets shouting, "We want the king."
But the old world was fading fast. The empire was dissolving, colonies seeking independence, and Britain was becoming something smaller, yet freer. Through it all, George VI remained steadfast, a bridge between tradition and change. When he died in 1952, the nation wept. And then a new queen ascended, young, calm, and radiant. Her name was Elizabeth. As Elizabeth's reign reached its later years, a quiet unease grew. For all her glory, she had no heir. The Virgin Queen had refused marriage and children, a decision that would leave England facing yet another succession crisis. Her courtiers worried. When the Virgin Queen died, who would inherit her crown? The answer came from north of the border. James VI of Scotland, son of the ill-fated Mary Queen of Scots. When Elizabeth died in 1603, James inherited the English throne, uniting England and Scotland under one crown. Thus began the Stuart dynasty and a new chapter in Britain's long story. The Stuarts and the shadow of division. James I, as he was now called in England, believed strongly in the divine right of kings, that monarchs were chosen by God and answered only to him. This belief put him on a slow collision course with Parliament, which had begun to see itself as the voice of the people. Still, James was a man of learning and peace. He sponsored the King James Bible, a translation that would shape English language and culture for centuries. Under his rule, London's theaters thrived, and the first English colonies were founded in America, including Jamestown, named after the king himself. But the old world was fading fast. The empire was dissolving, colonies seeking independence, and Britain was becoming something smaller, yet freer. Through it all, George VI remained steadfast, a bridge between tradition and change. When he died in 1952, the nation wept. And then a new queen ascended, young, calm, and radiant. Her name was Elizabeth. As Elizabeth's reign reached its later years, a quiet unease grew. For all her glory, she had no heir. The Virgin Queen had refused marriage and children, a decision that would leave England facing yet another succession crisis. Her courtiers worried. When the Virgin Queen died, who would inherit her crown? The answer came from north of the border. James VI of Scotland, son of the ill-fated Mary Queen of Scots. When Elizabeth died in 1603, James inherited the English throne, uniting England and Scotland under one crown. Thus began the Stuart dynasty and a new chapter in Britain's long story. The Stuarts and the shadow of division. James I, as he was now called in England, believed strongly in the divine right of kings, that monarchs were chosen by God and answered only to him. This belief put him on a slow collision course with Parliament, which had begun to see itself as the voice of the people. Still, James was a man of learning and peace. He sponsored the King James Bible, a translation that would shape English language and culture for centuries. Under his rule, London's theaters thrived, and the first English colonies were founded in America, including Jamestown, named after the king himself.
But seeds of conflict had been planted. His son, Charles I, would face their bitter harvest. Charles I was reserved and dignified, but he lacked political skill. He married a French Catholic princess, which angered his Protestant subjects. His insistence on ruling without parliament, raising taxes, and enforcing unpopular religious reforms pushed the nation toward rebellion. By 1642, England was at war with itself. Royalists, loyal to the king, against parliamentarians led by the stern and determined Oliver Cromwell. The English Civil War tore through towns and families. Brother fought brother. Neighbor turned against neighbor. After years of brutal conflict, the unthinkable happened. In 1649, King Charles I was captured, tried for treason, and executed before a silent, stunned crowd. For the first time in history, an English king was killed by his own people. The monarchy was gone. England became a republic, the Commonwealth, ruled by Cromwell and his Puritans. The interregnum, England without a king. Cromwell was a capable leader, but his rule was joyless. Theaters were closed, dancing was banned, and even Christmas was forbidden. The land that had once been merry became gray and solemn. People began to miss their monarchy, or at least the life and color that had come with it. When Cromwell died in 1658, the experiment crumbled. His son could not hold power, and the nation yearned for stability. In 1660, Parliament invited Charles II, son of the executed king, to return from exile. The monarchy was restored, and with it, laughter, art, and revelry. The Merry Monarch. Charles II was everything his father wasn't: charming, witty, and endlessly indulgent. He loved parties, women, and the theater. London came alive again under his reign. But his time was not without trials. But seeds of conflict had been planted. His son, Charles I, would face their bitter harvest. Charles I was reserved and dignified, but he lacked political skill. He married a French Catholic princess, which angered his Protestant subjects. His insistence on ruling without parliament, raising taxes, and enforcing unpopular religious reforms pushed the nation toward rebellion. By 1642, England was at war with itself. Royalists, loyal to the king, against parliamentarians led by the stern and determined Oliver Cromwell. The English Civil War tore through towns and families. Brother fought brother. Neighbor turned against neighbor. After years of brutal conflict, the unthinkable happened. In 1649, King Charles I was captured, tried for treason, and executed before a silent, stunned crowd. For the first time in history, an English king was killed by his own people. The monarchy was gone. England became a republic, the Commonwealth, ruled by Cromwell and his Puritans. The interregnum, England without a king. Cromwell was a capable leader, but his rule was joyless. Theaters were closed, dancing was banned, and even Christmas was forbidden. The land that had once been merry became gray and solemn. People began to miss their monarchy, or at least the life and color that had come with it. When Cromwell died in 1658, the experiment crumbled. His son could not hold power, and the nation yearned for stability. In 1660, Parliament invited Charles II, son of the executed king, to return from exile. The monarchy was restored, and with it, laughter, art, and revelry. The Merry Monarch. Charles II was everything his father wasn't: charming, witty, and endlessly indulgent. He loved parties, women, and the theater. London came alive again under his reign. But his time was not without trials. Rather than leadership, he built the dazzling royal pavilion in Brighton, filled with oriental splendor. But his reign also saw deep poverty and unrest among ordinary people who suffered during the Industrial Revolution. His brother, William IV, succeeded him briefly. William was more modest and down-to-earth, and his reign brought a vital reform, the Reform Act of 1832, which expanded voting rights and began Britain's slow journey toward democracy. When William died in 1837, the throne passed to his young niece, a girl of just 18. Her name was Victoria, and her reign would define an era. The Victorian Age. Queen Victoria reigned for more than 60 years, one of the longest in British history. Under her rule, Britain became the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. She married her cousin, Prince Albert, and together they represented a model of domestic virtue. Their 9 children married into royal families across Europe, earning Victoria the nickname Grandmother of Europe. The Industrial Revolution transformed the nation. Steam power, railways, and factories changed how people lived and worked. London became a global capital of finance and culture. But it was also a city of contrasts, grandeur and poverty side by side. Victoria endured personal tragedy when Albert died in 1861. She retreated from public life, mourning him for decades. The people still revered her, though, as a symbol of stability and duty. As the 19th century closed, the sun truly never set on the British Empire. From Canada to India, from Australia to Africa, it spanned the globe. Yet change was coming. Social reform, new politics, and the first stirrings of the modern age. The winds of the 20th century. When Victoria died in 1901, an age died with her. The throne passed to her son, Edward VII, whose reign ushered in a new Edwardian era of elegance and optimism, a brief golden moment before the storm of war. Edward was succeeded by his son, George V, in 1910. His reign would see the unimaginable, the First World War. As Britain fought Germany, George made the symbolic decision to change the royal family's name from the German-sounding House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to the House of Windsor, a name that endures today.
The Windsors: War, Scandal, and Survival. The dawn of the 20th century brought thunderous change. The world was entering an age of machines, empire, and ideology. And the British monarchy, ancient yet enduring, would need to adapt or perish. When George V inherited the throne in 1910, he could not have foreseen the storm that was coming. The glittering courts of Europe, his cousins in Germany and Russia, seemed stable, eternal. Yet in just a few years, the world would tear itself apart. The Great War. In 1914, a gunshot in Sarajevo sparked a chain of events that plunged Europe into World War I. Britain joined the Allied powers against Germany and Austria-Hungary.
For the first time, modern warfare consumed millions of lives. Trenches, gas, and machine guns turned fields into wastelands. At the heart of the war were royal cousins, George V of Britain, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, all grandchildren of Queen Victoria. The war shattered not only nations, but also royal dynasties. The Russian Tsar was overthrown and executed. German and Austrian emperors fell. Only the British monarchy survived. Barely. Anti-German sentiment ran high in Britain. The royal family, with their German name Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, faced criticism. In 1917, George V made a historic decision. He renamed his family the House of Windsor, after the ancient English castle that symbolized their nation. It was a shrewd act of public relations that helped preserve the crown. When the war ended in 1918, Britain was exhausted. The monarchy, though diminished, had endured. George V became a symbol of unity in an age of upheaval.
The crisis of abdication. When George V died in 1936, his eldest son became King Edward VIII, a modern, charismatic, and independent man. But Edward's reign would last less than a year. He had fallen deeply in love with Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. The British government, the church, and the public was scandalized. A king could not marry a twice-divorced woman and remain head of the Church of England. Edward faced an impossible choice: crown or love. In December 1936, he chose love. In a broadcast to the nation, his voice trembled with sincerity as he declared, "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king without the help and support of the woman I love." He abdicated the throne, the first monarch ever to do so voluntarily. His younger brother reluctantly became King George VI. George VI and the war that defined a nation. George VI was shy, gentle, and plagued by a stammer. He had never expected to be king, and yet, when duty called, he rose to the challenge. His courage and quiet strength would make him one of Britain's most beloved monarchs. In 1939, World War II erupted. Once again, Britain stood against tyranny, this time facing Nazi Germany. As bombs rained down on London during the Blitz, the royal family refused to flee. The King and Queen Elizabeth, later known as the Queen Mother, stayed in Buckingham Palace, even after it was bombed, to share in their people's suffering. Their presence gave hope. George VI's steady voice, broadcast to millions, reminded the nation that endurance and unity would see them through. When the war finally ended in 1945, Britain emerged victorious, but weary. The empire that had once stretched across the world began to dissolve. A new era was dawning. The dawn of Elizabeth II. In 1952, after years of fragile peace and slow recovery, King George VI died in his sleep. The crown passed to his 25-year-old daughter, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor, a woman who would come to define the modern monarchy. Her coronation, broadcast live on television, captivated millions. For the first time, ordinary people could witness the ancient ritual of crowning a monarch. It was both a tradition and a revolution in connection. Elizabeth's reign began in a time of great transition. Britain was rebuilding, letting go of its empire and redefining its place in the world.
The young queen embodied continuity, dignity, and calm. The age of Elizabeth, a changing world. Over the decades, the queen became a constant in a rapidly changing society. She met every British prime minister from Winston Churchill to Liz Truss, and countless world leaders, from Kennedy to Mandela. The world around her transformed. The Suez Crisis, the Cold War, the moon landing, and the rise of pop culture all unfolded during her reign. The empire turned into a commonwealth of nations, bound not by conquest, but by cooperation. Through it all, Elizabeth II maintained a quiet grace that endeared her to generations. She rarely gave interviews, preferring action to words. Yet her image, stoic, elegant, unwavering, became one of the most recognized faces on earth. Family and shadows. But the royal story is never without its shadows. Behind palace walls, human drama played out. Love, loss, and scandal. Her sister, Princess Margaret, was glamorous and troubled, her love life often clashing with royal expectations. Her children, Charles, Anne, Andrew, and Edward, grew up under the relentless gaze of the press.
The 1980s brought both fairy tale and heartbreak. In 1981, Prince Charles married Lady Diana Spencer, and the world watched in awe. Their wedding was a spectacle of pageantry seen by hundreds of millions. Diana became the people's princess, beloved for her warmth and compassion. But behind the fairy tale lay a failing marriage. The couple's separation, affairs, and emotional struggles unfolded publicly. The monarchy, once shrouded in mystique, found itself under a harsh modern spotlight. Then, in 1997, tragedy struck. Princess Diana died in a car crash in Paris, and the world mourned. Crowds filled the streets of London, laying flowers outside the palace gates. The Queen faced criticism for her initial silence, but when she finally addressed the nation, her words were simple and heartfelt. "What I say to you now, as your queen and as your grandmother, I say from my heart." It was a moment of reconnection, a reminder that behind the crown was a human being. The new millennium. As the 21st century dawned, Queen Elizabeth II entered her later years still devoted to service. She embraced new technologies, celebrated jubilees, and adapted to modern life without surrendering the monarchy's timeless dignity. She became a symbol not just of Britain, but of endurance itself, a thread linking past and present. Her face had graced coins, stamps, and memories for over 70 years. In 2022, after an extraordinary 70-year reign, Queen Elizabeth II passed away peacefully at Balmoral Castle. The world paused. Bells tolled, crowds wept, and the words, "God save the Queen," were replaced once more with, "God save the King." Her son ascended the throne as King Charles III, marking the start of a new chapter for the British monarchy. King Charles III, the modern crown. Charles's path to the throne was long and often controversial. For decades, he had been both heir and reformer, a man deeply concerned with the environment, architecture, and tradition.
Now as king, his task is delicate: to balance the weight of ancient duty with the demands of a modern, skeptical age. He reigns in a Britain far different from that of his mother's youth, a nation more diverse, more questioning, and more digital. Yet the monarchy remains a thread of continuity, a living symbol of the country's story. The legacy of 1,000 years. From the shadowed halls of early medieval kings to the global stage of the modern monarchy, the British crown has endured wars, revolutions, and scandals. It has adapted, evolved, and redefined itself again and again. It began with warlords and conquerors, Alfred, William, Henry, and Edward, and became a dynasty of statesmen and survivors, Victoria, George, Elizabeth, and Charles. The British monarchy today stands not as an empire of power, but as an emblem of identity, a link to history, ceremony, and the shared memory of a people. 1,000 years ago, the crown was forged in blood and ambition. Today, it survives through tradition and the quiet will of its subjects. And perhaps that is the secret of its endurance. It is not just the story of kings and queens, but the story of a nation that, through all its trials, has never let go of its sense of continuity. Epilogue: The crown endures. The crown itself, gleaming in the Tower of London, has seen the rise and fall of empires. Its jewels once adorned crusaders and conquerors. Now they rest beneath the lights of television cameras and modern ceremony. But even as centuries pass and the world changes beyond recognition, one truth remains. The story of the British monarchy is the story of Britain itself, proud, flawed, enduring. As long as there is a Britain, there will likely be a crown, not as a symbol of tyranny or privilege, but as a living bridge between yesterday and tomorrow. And in that quiet continuity, something remarkable endures, the heartbeat of history itself.